Good morning, Heartland. Sorry for the slight technical delay. We're joining you this morning from the warm studios here at Heartland, hoping you're staying warm in the cold embrace of a Manitoba winter. We're throwing you a bit of a change-up this week. Andy's has been faithfully grinding away, and he gets the next couple Sundays off. That doesn't mean we don't have an exciting service for you this morning. We have some updates. We have a message from the Word, and we have some worship as well. We look forward to you joining us. Good morning again, Heartland. It's me, Travis Plett. It's been a while. I haven't been on camera since last summer, actually, of August of 2020. I was on sabbatical in the fall. I got married, which both of those things we'll talk about in a bit. But first, I want to talk about this weather. One of the things I found, it seems like we have our months a bit backwards this year. It seems like normally January is supposed to be the dreadfully cold month, and February is supposed to be a bit of a reprieve. But we're seeing sort of the flip, and that has sort of left me in a bit of a bind. What we ended up doing is my wife and I, we bought a vehicle last weekend, and we were very excited for it, and we were going to go do some grocery shopping yesterday. And we ended up trying to turn that sucker over, and it wouldn't start. We're like, shoot, forgot to plug it in. So we go and we look for the block heater, and we realize there's no block heater in the car we just bought. And we're like, oh my goodness, what the heck do we do? That sort of leads me to the question and prompt I want to give you guys this morning. Sort of in the past, we've sort of had a community engagement question. My question is, what has sort of been an oh no moment for you with your vehicles over the years? It could be something in the winter, crashing into a snowbank. It could be that you accidentally put the wrong type of fuel in your car. Let us know some of the things that have gone wrong with your car. We have some exciting things happening here at Heartland over the past little while. As many of you know, we're still building our daycare. We're going hardcore on that. We've actually had some really positive updates into there. They've been drywalling and taping, and we have a couple of progress pictures for you to see. This is sort of the part of the building that belongs to Heartland, actually. How it works is the daycare is an addition onto our building, and we have a space that's set aside for us as well. That's going to replace our former garage. And this is actually that space that we have. And we were just very impressed, actually, both with the size and how bright it is. And we're very much looking forward to how we get to use this space. On the other side of the wall, we actually see what the daycare will be. And we see that it's actually such a nice, bright, open space as well. And we're very much looking forward to being able to walk in there and use that space for the kids programs that are coming up, the daycare programs. As some of you know, we've been building this building over the past few months, and we've been accepting applications now, and the applications are starting to come in. So if you know people who are still interested, you can keep sending them on to info@GoHeartland or Andy@GoHeartland for more information on resumes dropping off and stuff like that. I have a couple of announcements to get to as well. You may have seen in your emails, but we ran a practice Zoom meeting yesterday morning. We're actually planning on having a congregation meeting over Zoom tomorrow at 7 o'clock. And so we wanted to give the opportunity for those that aren't very familiar or aren't comfortable to log on and try it. If you haven't had the opportunity to do that and you're still a little bit uncomfortable, we do encourage you to reach out. You can reach out to me. My email is travis@goheartland.ca. And we've asked Cheryl as well if she might be willing to help, and she'd be willing to help in a one-on-one connecting way as well. So if you're a little bit unfamiliar with Zoom and you'd still like to be part of our congregational meeting, we very much encourage you to be part of that. Part of the congregational meeting has a couple things to it. Our financials went out. If your email has been in our database, we've sent the financials out via our MailChimp. And so it talks about our past year and it talks about our proposed budget this year. As well as two things that I feel like our church should be very much involved with. My contract was renewed over a longer period than we actually had hoped. When my contract was renewed, it was renewed in January. I was originally told it would happen in June, and this time we're trying to help Dwayne and Andy get a little bit of clarity before 6 months after the contract, and so both of their contracts are being discussed at the upcoming meeting as well, and we're very much looking forward to how we can encourage our pastors and how we can continue to bless them and engage in them in this process. Another announcement I'd like to draw our attention to is that some people have been having a bit of difficulty accessing our services on Facebook. No fear, we have a Heartland YouTube page now where we post our videos after the service. They won't be live there, but we're going to be archiving our services going forward and placing them onto our YouTube page. So if you know people who haven't been able to watch our services because of it being on Facebook, we will be able to have a page where we can see our videos retroactively and just go to the one-click thing. You can search Heartland Community Church Landmark or Heartland Landmark and you can find our page. There's already some videos up there from past sermons and we'll be continuing to upload our current sermons onto there. At this time, it looks like I'm the only person who has problems with their car in winter, so that's fine by me. We're going to be moving into the Kids Zone video.
There once was a woman named Ruth who lived in a land called Moab. Ruth married into the family of a woman named Naomi. But all of the men in Naomi's family died, and Ruth was left without a husband. One day, Naomi decided to go back to her homeland of Israel, and Ruth decided to go with her. On their journey, Naomi said to Ruth, "Go back to your mother's home. May the Lord bless you." But Ruth was determined to go on with Naomi, and Ruth said, "Don't ask me to leave you. Wherever you go, I will go. Wherever you live, I will live. Your people will be my people, and your God will be my God." Through love and kindness, Ruth would not give up on Naomi. God had a plan for Ruth and guided her along the way. The Lord provided Ruth with a job working in a field, and Ruth never gave up. Ruth followed her heart, and in doing so, God rewarded her faithfulness. She married a godly man, and Ruth's son would carry out God's plan to bring Jesus to this earth.
It gives me a lot of delight to introduce you to my wife, Macy Plett. We were just married in January, and we want to do a little bit of an introduction and a little bit of a how to get to know you, so you can see the woman that I've married, but also a little bit of a talk of what we and what I've been up to over the last few months. Because, like I said, it's been a summer since I've been on camera, anyways. So, Macy and I have known each other for just over a year now, closer to a year and a half. And pretty much our whole relationship has taken part during COVID. The bulk of our relationship has been during COVID. And so it's a really interesting experience to date, to get engaged and get married in a pandemic, especially when this is unprecedented in the world and how things have worked. And so one of the things that happened, so we got engaged last August. My brother-in-law runs a camp out there, but because of the pandemic, they couldn't host students. And so we went out there for just a retreat weekend, a fishing weekend or whatever. And a funny story. So when we were out there, I knew I was going to propose out there. And so I was sort of in my head thinking of how it would happen. And so we're out fishing and we're catching nothing. And a flaw of Travis is he's a grumpy Gus when he doesn't catch fish. And so we're out in the boat and I know I'm going to propose and I'm in my head thinking about this. I'm a little bit upset that I haven't caught any fish. And here's Macy trying to make me laugh.
So I start asking random questions like, if you could be one character from the Bible, like who would you choose to be? Or if you could only have candy or chocolate for the rest of your life, which would you choose? I'm thinking he's just so grumpy that I need to break the silence and make this more fun somehow. Meanwhile, Travis is coming up with a plan in his head that I have no idea what's happening.
It's true. So I'm terrible at secrets. And as of right now, I was trying to look into her eyes always to figure out if she knew what was happening. So I was doing these like random awkward stares at her all weekend. And all of a sudden I realized she doesn't know. This might be the first time she doesn't know. And so I got really excited and we went full steam ahead and we went for a hike that night because we're avid stargazers. And so we went out and we stared at some stars and
First off, when we get to the spot, I look at Travis and I told him, I'm like, Travis, this is perfect. And this is his moment of panic where he's like, she knows what's happening. Meanwhile, I still have no clue. It was just literally the perfect spot to be watching stars at. And then it wasn't 5 minutes later that somebody was down on his knee in front of me.
She said yes.
Here we are.
But moving forward, so we got engaged end of August. What we then went on was a journey that many engaged couples battle. What will the wedding look like? We went through probably 3 different iterations of our wedding. Initially, we booked Winkler Bible Camp because they told us we could have 90 people there safely. Unfortunately, when the province moved into Code Orange, they had to just straight up cancel our booking. So we then looked at Macy's Church, because they told us that we could have 50 people there. Province, fast forward a couple weeks, the province moves into red, and we have to cancel everything. At this point, we were pretty discouraged, but fortunately, we hadn't sunk money into things that we couldn't get back. We had bought our clothes, and we bought our flowers, which were silk flowers, and then we decided not to make any plans until we knew a bit more. And so our original wedding date was for the 16th of January. And so January comes around and we still have 0 plans. And so we spent a sad evening on my couch asking each other, are we getting married?
Yeah, because at this point the province was saying for a wedding you could only have 5 people, and I'm not the kind of girl that's ever had my whole wedding picked out. Like, it didn't matter to me what the venue was, it didn't matter what the food was. People are my thing. That's all I needed. And we're kind of at the point of frustration with restrictions lifting so slowly. We didn't know what could happen. I couldn't fathom having 5 people at our wedding. And Travis was like, you know what, it would be okay. It would be okay. I kind of put my foot down a little harshly and I said, no, I can't do it. So we had to get creative with some of our planning, and we did an outdoor wedding at one of our spots that we really enjoyed going hiking and stargazing at. So on the 16th, we got married at Roseau River, just kind of at the trailhead, and we had a very small amount of people there. I think in total we had 30 people, and everybody was in their vehicles, so we were appropriately distanced. It was us standing outside, which was colder than it looked for anybody that saw the video. It probably looked like I wasn't shivering. I've had that comment. I was shaking. And then yet the strap on my little shawl that I was wearing broke, so I was trying to keep that on just to keep warm in any way.
Oh, and I tried to look really cute. So so the strap broke, and so she's like trying to keep the thing. And before we were holding hands, and so to try to be cute, I just like hold the bottom of her shawl to make it look like I'm still holding her hands.
Yeah, and yeah, so it was an entire wedding that was planned kind of last minute. We didn't have a unity activity planned. We weren't going to do one. And then the evening before, we kind of thought we enjoyed doing communion. It's something that we've taken up in our relationship a few times. And yeah, it's just really significant to us. So we decided last minute that we would do that. So if you did see the video, you see that I kind of give Travis this shocked look when he tells me to read. It's because I was unaware that I was doing any of the reading. And also I had a giant chunk of bread in my mouth because Travis broke me off a huge piece for doing communion. So I'm still choking on bread. I'm supposed to be reading this passage. I couldn't find where I was, and I still had bread in my hand, so I lightly drop that behind the crates where the wine was sitting on and to start reading. And then after we're done communion, I started to wave. I wasn't waving at the audience or the camera. There were some cross-country skiers in the back that yelled congratulations at us. So that's where the big wave came from.
There's also these hikers that were just so pumped for us, and they stopped. We're like, "Are you getting married?" We're like, "Yeah, we are." They're like, "Can we stand here and watch?" And so we're glad that we could bring some joy to some people during a time like this. One of the other things I wanted to say is, like I said, I haven't been around much on camera, and I haven't been at the church much in the fall. I was on sabbatical, and what a sabbatical is something that comes from Scripture, that in the 7th year the land rests. And it's something that the church has taken up for a lot of people that work in ministry positions, is that sort of after 7 years of service or 6 years of service, in the 7th year they're given a rest of types. And so our church has had a sabbatical policy for a couple of years, and I decided to make use of it because I'm working on my master's actually right now. I'm studying at Providence Seminary. I'm doing an Old Testament language degree. And so I was taking both Hebrew language and Greek language, theology, and preaching this fall, which felt busy leading up to a wedding and leading up to a new life. I recently wrote a report to our leadership as well. And if anyone is interested of sort of the type of things I learned and what emotionally a sabbatical did for me, I invite you to message me. It's going to be made available to anyone who wants. My email is travis@goheartland.ca. It sort of outlines my courses, it outlines what I learned, and then it has a sort of a personal impact statement of the benefit of rest, the benefit of doing something different, and how I felt recharged and reinvigorated through this process. At this time, we're going to thank Macy for being here on camera. We're going to transition into our worship element for the night, for the evening, for the morning.
This is my prayer in the desert, when all that's within me feels dry. This is my prayer in my hunger and need. My God is the
A huge thank you to Kim for doing that song for us. I'm going to pray, and then we're going to get into today's message as well. Father, we thank you so much for who you are. We thank you so much for what you're doing. God, we ask that as we study the book of Ruth, that we'd see who you are and what you're doing, how you transform and how you don't abandon. God, we love you. Speak to us through your word. Amen. So, Macy, for my birthday in 2020, she got me a Chemex, which is a sort of a fancy pour-over coffee maker. The really cool thing about Chemex is how smooth it makes the coffee taste. It often takes that sort of very common bitter flavor often associated with coffee, and it sort of lessens it. It doesn't get rid of it completely because coffee is just inherently bitter, which is interesting because that bitterness flavor is actually something that most people would say is negative. And there's very few foods actually that we'd positively associate with bitterness. And that would probably be coffee, maybe dark chocolate, if some of you probably like grapefruit. But the list is relatively short. So why do we not actually like that bitter flavor? It actually all comes down to chemistry. There's receptors in our mouths that pick up flavors, and flavors are just a fancy way of saying how the chemicals we eat interact with our mouths. And so there's key chemicals that trigger taste responses in our mouths. The common ones being sweet, salty, savory, sour, and bitter. And the common chemicals that cause a sort of bitter sensation would be caffeine, which is found in coffee, nicotine, which is found in cigarettes, and actually strychnine, which is found in pesticides. So many scientists have sort of come to the belief that the reason people don't like bitter taste is because they associate it with danger or poison. And so the main reason we end up liking things with bitter flavors isn't actually the fact that they're bitter. Unless you are a sucker for punishment. Most of the time, we like the taste of bitter foods or drinks is because of how other flavors mix in with them. Think of dark chocolate. I think very few people enjoy dark chocolate without there being some sweetness to it. Or grapefruit, where how you have that sort of mix of the bitter and the sour. And think of coffee, how it mixes with just a general desire to not be grumpy. That's actually why we like it. We actually see this sort of exact thing sort of play out in Scripture. We actually see in Exodus 15 an interaction with bitter water. And it says this, "Then Moses led Israel from the Red Sea, and they went into the desert of Shur. For 3 days they traveled in the desert without finding water. When they came to Marah, they could not drink its water because it was bitter. This is why the place is called Marah. So the people grumbled against Moses, saying, 'What are we to drink?' Then Moses cried out to the Lord, and the Lord showed him a piece of wood. He threw it into the water, and the water became fit to drink." And so while it's fun to talk about flavors, we know that the word bitterness or bitter has sort of a dual meaning. If I were to say I feel bitter, you would know that I'm talking about probably a circumstance that happened that sort of changed how I feel. It would have taken me from a disposition of probably happy and positive and turned it negative. To be bitter is to have resentment, discontent, frustration about something. And this emotion, much like in flavor, often speaks to the poisoning or dangerous emotion that goes on inside of us. And this is what I want us to be thinking about as we approach this first Sunday talking about Ruth. This bitterness inside. But before we get there, there's more to be understood about the context of the story of Ruth. For it takes place in the Old Testament, which often needs a little bit more explaining before we can just approach the word. So I want to give you a bit of help with the time frame. The very first verse in Ruth 1:1 says this, "In the days when the judges judged, there was a famine in the land." So this is already trying to set up the time frame of what's happening for the people. So we know that the Israelites are living in the land because the time of Judges was after they had already inherited the promised land. So they're living in the land, but there's no king yet because we're told that the judges are sort of ruling. The judges are judging. And a common element of this time was that each tribe, clan, and family is left to do their own thing. And this could mean that things could be good, that the people turn to God and are obeying and worship Him, or as we see in a lot of other times in the book of Judges, that things have gone very far astray and that there's destruction of people coming in or famine, as we see here, and they need deliverance. So I'm going to go out on a limb here and say that because the people seem settled and they don't talk about invaders, this is a peace period in the time in between Judges and Samuel. But I think it happens just shortly after the events of Judges 17 to 21. And I bring this up because this time in Israelite history was marked by an incredible wickedness and selfishness that led to the people of Israel abandoning God and seeking their own interests. There's this repeated line in the last 4 chapters of Judges, and it says this: "In those days, Israel has no king, and everyone did as they saw fit." And this is significant because in Judges 17 through 21, where we see this repeated verse, we see the most violent and disturbing time in Israelite history. The stories that end Judges involve a graphic rape and a gruesome civil war which nearly annihilated an entire tribe of Israel. So the book of Ruth is following after this dark time, before a king. So when we hear of Naomi and Ruth being without the security of marriage, being without family, we should be very concerned for their safety, because there's those that are going to seek to do as they see fit. And they could very well exploit or harm Naomi or Ruth. And it's actually crucial that Naomi and Ruth find protection and promise of a future, or they may become, at best, helpless drifters, or at worst, abused and killed. But there's also something else that we need to understand about the culture of that time, and that's actually how they treated foreigners, primarily Moabites. But so we see that Ruth is a Moabite, a Moabitess, and the writer of Ruth makes a point of stressing this over and over again: Ruth the Moabitess, Ruth the Moabitess, Ruth the Moabitess. I invite you actually to go back and reread the book again and see how many times that comes up. It's actually quite prominent. You see, the Israelites were enemies with Moab. And this was a long-term conflict between the two nations. It was actually the Moabites that convinced a sort of, I don't quite know how to describe him. His name is Balaam, and he was someone used to invoke curses upon nations. And so the Moabites, back in Numbers 22, asked him to curse the Israelites, but he couldn't. In fact, his donkey stopped on the road and talked to him, saying, "I won't go further because the angels of the Lord are stopping us." And even when Balaam gets there to curse them, all he can do is praise them. But because of this attempted curse, the Lord tells the Israelites not to let the Moabites into their assembly. It says this in Deuteronomy 23. So again, we see that Ruth is disadvantaged because of her cultural background. The Israelites will naturally distrust her and even despise her because of her background. But to make matters worse, the women of Moab were also seen as seductresses, as they are implicated as stumbling blocks to the men of Israel, because back in Numbers 25, they invited the men to sacrifice to false gods and to practice sexual sin with them. So we have these two big motivating factors for how we should be reading the book of Israel, the book of Ruth. The fact that Israel is kind of in a Wild West type state, and that Moabites are despised in Israel, added to the fact that these are widowed women, should make us aware that Naomi and Ruth are in a very dangerous position. There are no rules, and people are doing as they see fit. And women lack the power and the means to improve their social status at this time. And this is the context that the book of Ruth takes place in. And with these contextual issues in our mind, I want to examine the story. So, because we will be talking more about themes and specific verses or specific chapters the next 2 weeks, I want to give sort of a quick summary both this week and next week of the book of Ruth. And so, as we've seen and as we heard in that short video from before, it's about a family in the midst of a famine that goes looking for food and for a better life. So they flee to the land of Moab. And this wasn't uncommon. People often fled to different nations at that time looking for hope for a future. We see that often towards Egypt. Moab was often also described as the breadbasket of that area, so that would be a common place for people to go. But Moab was the land of their enemies. And so they make a life in a foreign land. Elimelech, Naomi's husband, and her two sons, they go there and they settle down roots. In fact, Machlon and Kilion, Naomi's sons, take Moabite women and marry there. But then tragedy strikes the family, as one by one the men in the family die. First Naomi's husband Elimelech, then her two sons Machlon and Kilion, leaving Naomi and her two daughter-in-laws stranded and alone. So, Naomi, after hearing that God had brought an end to the famine and brought bread, decides to return to Bethlehem, which is ironic because it literally means house of bread, to her people in hopes of finding someone to take care of her. Her one daughter-in-law, Orpah, is convinced to stay in Moab. But the other daughter-in-law, Ruth, will not be dissuaded, and she gives one of the famous lines of Scripture, and it says this: "Where you go, I will go. Where you stay, I will stay. Your people will be my people, your God, my God. Where you die, I will die, and there I will be buried. May the Lord deal with me, be it ever so severely, if even death separates you and me." So Naomi and Ruth travel back to Israel in hopes of a better life, a life that needs to be healed of the pain of loss. Ruth actually ends up scavenging grain off the fields of Boaz, and he's described as a man of valor, which we'll talk more about next week. And he ends up looking out for Ruth, which we'll also talk more about next week, and allows her not to just scavenge, but take choice grain as well. When Naomi finds out that Ruth is working for Boaz, she's really excited because Boaz is related to them. So Naomi hatches a plan to seek to have Ruth marry Boaz. I know that sounds weird because it just said that he was related to them, but it was a little bit different there. And don't think about this as like siblings or maybe even cousins. This was probably more of a familiar or a clan than an actual very close blood relationship. But and so Ruth goes late at night to visit Boaz while he's sleeping beside his pile of grain to let him know that she wants to marry him. And so Boaz wakes up finding a woman sleeping at his feet with his robe lifted off them, and he understands exactly what she wants and tells her he will marry her. But first, he needs to sort of sort out the legal process, which he does the next day. And so Ruth and Boaz marry. They conceive a child, which is given to Naomi, which is confusing, but it's part of the cultural traditions of that time as well. And this child of Ruth, his name is Obed, the father of Jesse, the father of King David. And that's where the story of Ruth ends, on this genealogy going from Perez to David. And that was an incredibly brief version of the story, but we sort of need to understand the flow of the story for what we talk about this morning to make sense. But for this morning, we're going to be primarily focusing on the first and the fourth chapter, and next week we'll look at chapters 2 and 3. But what we end up seeing in chapters 1 and 4 is a sort of focus on Naomi. And so I know it's going to be a bit strange that the book is named Ruth, but this Sunday we're going to be pretty much only talking about Naomi. But come back next Sunday and we'll talk more about Ruth. So just as a heads up. And so the author gives us details of the setting and what's going on before slowing down and focusing on Naomi. And so after the death of her husband and two sons, Naomi hears that God has visited the people of Israel and brought bread. And this convinces Naomi to make her way back to Israel. When Naomi returns from Moab back to Bethlehem, the women of the town are all worked up and questioning whether this is Naomi. To which she replies, "Don't call me Naomi," she told them. "Call me Mara, because the Almighty has made me very bitter." Now, Naomi has lost her husband and two sons. She's not in a good place socially, financially, and probably not emotionally. She sees herself as crushed by God, and so she changes her name from Naomi to Mara. Naomi means in Hebrew, "my sweet one," which was a fairly normal name at that time, and so we can actually be pretty confident that was her actual name. But the name she chooses, Mara, is a name that holds significance to the story. See, Naomi says to call herself Mara because the Almighty has made her life very bitter. Well, the meaning of the name Mara is bitter. She literally called herself bitter. And this is actually what I was referencing a bit in the Exodus passage that we read early. They called the waters Mara because they were bitter. So what we see here is a little bit of a play on words. My sweet one is no longer sweet, but rather bitter. And while we can look at that wordplay and say it's clever, we're actually getting a pretty real look into the heart of one that has experienced a lot of pain. And the idea that pain makes us bitter is not unfamiliar at all. We're living in a world that cries out from its pain, be it the pain of isolation and loneliness, be it the pain of a loss of a loved one, be it the pain of unmet desires or dreams. We know this feeling. We know this feeling of loss that causes our insides to feel that bitterness. Yet what we see in Naomi is where the pain sits and dwells within, turning what was sweet into what is bitter. But Naomi goes on to say that where this bitterness comes from, she says this in verse 21, I went away full, but the Lord has brought me back empty. Why call me Naomi? The Lord has afflicted me. The Almighty has brought misfortune upon me. Now, the story is making it very plain that the full Naomi was a Naomi with a husband and 2 sons. So she's right when she said she left full, for she had provision, she had a family, she had safety, she had hope for a future. But they died one by one. All that safety, that hope and future, it faded away till she was left with nothing. She, in that moment of return, looked at those that greeted her and explained to them the pain that she was going through. And I think we can all feel along with her, that her life has been a raw deal, that the pain she feels is justified, that what she's going through isn't fair, and that the bitterness has grown inside, and that makes sense to us. But what that bitterness has done has caused Naomi to question the goodness of God. For Naomi implies feeling in that moment is abandonment from God. She feels that God has done something cruel to her. He has loved others, but he has crushed her. And that actually resonated with me because I know I particularly struggled with that thought. And I know it sort of started in my late teens. I was quite taken with a girl, and I was praying about what to do. And I asked God, why do I like her so much? And I remember I was going for a run, and I can remember the exact place it was too. And his response to me was, to teach you how to constantly think of me. Now, I do believe God spoke to me in that moment, and I do believe I was very, very angry in that moment because it felt like God was taking my emotions and just using them for something. And so I actually grew kind of bitter because I didn't want to share, I didn't want my heart to feel something just to be used in that way. And so I looked at God in a way as he wasn't being fair, as he was hurting me just because. And I noticed that each time after that I started having feelings towards a woman, that I would become distant towards God when I would pray about it. Because I had this feeling that I might get a repeat of what had just happened. And it was that way even when I started dating Macy. I stopped talking to God about her because deep inside I felt this fear and this defensiveness that God might take her away from me. And it took a conscious effort to release that fear and talk to God about it, to tell him I was bitter about how things had happened in the past. But bitterness is something we all fight when circumstances go against us. We bring up a lot of questions. Why did I have to lose my job? Why did my application get denied? Why did my relationship end? Why did my daughter miscarry? Why? Sin and death have more than enough power to rob us of our joy, to turn our hearts away from the love and the hope of God. Sin and death allow bitterness to crouch at our door. And if we're not careful, we can become poisoned by them. If we stay in that place, we run the risk of seeing God as the enemy. We run the risk of going from sweet to bitter. But that is not where our story ends. For sure not where the story of Ruth ends. And we see in verse 13, this is in chapter 4, verse 13, it says this. So Boaz took Ruth, and she became his wife. When he made love to her, the Lord enabled her to conceive, and she gave birth to a son. The woman said to Naomi, Praise be to the Lord, who this day has not left you without a guardian redeemer. May he become famous throughout Israel. He will renew your life and sustain you in your old age. For your daughter-in-law who loves you, who is better to you than 7 sons, has given birth. Then Naomi took the child in her arms and cared for him. The women living there said, Naomi has a son, and they named him Obed. He was the father of Jesse, the father of David. So in comparing the beginning of the book of Ruth to the end, we see a contrast in Naomi's life. We see a bitter and empty woman in chapter 1, but we see that she's made sweet and full in chapter 4. We are shown the woman Ruth, whom Naomi seemed not to think much of when she returned, but now we see that she's better than 7 sons. Through these 2 people, we see the work of God that not only saved one woman, but ultimately ended up saving all humanity, moving from bitter to sweet. What we see in these verses is an answer to the question of context. Those 2 women that were in danger, that were on the edge of losing what little hope they had, were given hope. And this happens because sin and death are not victors. Where it seems like death and pain would bring a defeat to Naomi and Ruth, God showed that death is not Lord. No, God placed a newborn baby into the lap of Naomi and showed her that the pain she had gone through with all of her loss would not overcome the joy and new birth that God will bring to her. And it was through the provision of a child that we could see most clearly how Naomi and Ruth were given redemption. In the strictly literal, pragmatic sense, the child ensured their place in the land. For he will inherit all of his father Elimelech's property, on top of being, I know that's a little bit of a confusing thing, but the child was given to Naomi as a replacement for her sons that had passed away. And so he would inherit all of the land of his father. And this promises a place for Naomi and ensures that there will be one to take care of her. Where this was all in doubt in chapter 1, it has been confirmed to her here in chapter 4 that she will be taken care of. The child being placed in her arms and being called her son is a call back to the beginning of chapter 1. In chapter 1, 11 to 13, it says this, Return home, my daughters. Why would you come with me? Am I going to have more sons who could become your husbands? Return home, my daughters. I am too old to have another husband. Even if I thought there was still hope for me, even if I had a husband tonight and then gave birth to sons, would you wait until they grew up? Would you remain unmarried for them? No, my daughters. It is more bitter for me than for you, because the Lord's hand is turned against me. We're shown in the story that while, yes, the child has ensured physical safety for Naomi and Ruth going forward, we're made aware of something even greater. God is not against Naomi. This is a huge moment. And we'll get more into this a little bit more next Sunday. But as we trace through the book of Ruth, you have to realize that God was at work the whole time. While Naomi was convinced that God was against her, speaking to this multiple times, God overcame that narrative when the child was placed in her arms. All along, God was working towards the redemption of Naomi and Ruth. And what we're able to witness is God redeeming a bitter and empty woman and making her sweet and full. And this is the message of the book of Ruth, but also the message of the gospel. You see, God does not leave his people in a place where death and pain are victors. For he placed another baby into the lap of another woman as well. He placed his very sons into the arm of a human mother. That son, Jesus, took the weight of all sin upon himself and gave us a hope and a future. For he took humanity, fragile, weak, and lost in the danger of being swallowed up by darkness, and he redeemed it. Through his shed blood, Jesus paid the price and conquered death. And we see this in 1 Corinthians. When the perishable has been clothed with the imperishable, and the mortal with immortality, then the saying that is written will come to pass. Death has been swallowed up in victory. Where, O death, is your victory? Where, O death, is your sting? If in Ruth we stop reading the story at the end of chapter 1, we end up in a place where we can only see God as one that takes and does not give. If we stop reading at chapter 1, we only see God as one who makes empty and does not fill. But just as we keep reading till the end of the story, so we keep living. We may look at our lives and feel bitter or empty. We feel the pain of loss when our loved ones pass away, when relationships break apart, when we're isolated and alone. But the story doesn't end there. Just like Naomi and Ruth, there is one that redeems. And through Christ Jesus, we are made sweet and filled. And this is easy to say and harder to believe, because we know that our lives are not fairy tales. They don't end like Hallmark movies. To feel pain makes it difficult to see beyond the present reality. And this is why our focus needs to be on something that is both in our present reality, yet not bound to it. And that is on God. For God is working even when we don't see it. He has worked already. We have reason for a hope in a future. For in Jesus dying on the cross and raising from the dead, we've invited into relationship with God. The temple curtain that prevented man from entering the presence of God was torn when Christ died, that we might actually boldly approach God and he might boldly approach us. And we see this in Revelation. And I heard a loud voice from the throne saying, "Look, God's dwelling place is now among the people. He will dwell with them. They will be his people, and God himself will be with them and be their God. He will wipe away every tear from their eyes. There will be no more death, or mourning, or crying, or pain, for the old order of things has passed away." Don't give up hope that Christ will turn our mourning into gladness, or that he wants to take the poison of bitterness from us to give us hope. But not just for our sakes, but also so that we are able to see and know that we serve a God that is not against us. I'm not going to lie to you and say that our lives will end up like Naomi's. I'm not going to promise you that just because you've had a reason for pain that there will be physical, tangible replacement of what you lost. But I will promise you that what God has revealed about himself through Christ is of worth more than gold, and that the promise of life in him more than outweighs any cost in this life. 1 Peter 1 says it this way: "Praise be to the God and Father of our Lord Jesus Christ. In his great mercy, he has given us new birth into a living hope through the resurrection of Jesus Christ from the dead, and into an inheritance that can never perish, spoil, or fade. This inheritance is kept in heaven for you, who through faith are shielded by God's power until the coming of salvation that is ready to be revealed in the last time. In all this you greatly rejoice, though now for a little while you may have to suffer grief in all kinds of trials. These have come so that the proven genuineness of your faith, of greater worth than gold, which perishes even though refined by fire, may result in praise, glory, and honor when Jesus Christ is revealed. Though you have not seen him, you love him. Even though you do not see him now, you believe in him and are filled with an inexpressible and glorious joy. For you're receiving the end result of your faith, the salvation of your souls." The story of Ruth is much like Desert Song, which Kim performed for us. There's real pain and trials that were threatening Naomi and Ruth, and us as well. But the book of Ruth, as well as Desert Song, gives us a reminder to praise God. For he has brought us from bitter to sweet, and from empty to filled. He has placed redemption into our hands that we might look upon it, see it, and know it. Sin and death may make us feel broken, may make us feel weary, may make us feel bitter and empty. But Christ's redemption of our souls makes us whole, restores, makes our hearts sweet with joy, and fills us with the presence of the Spirit. And ultimately, the promised Spirit is a sign of our salvation. So I want us to turn our attention to the last verse of Desert Song, and actually a couple verses in particular in Ruth. The last verse of Desert Song says this: "And this is my prayer in the harvest, when favor and providence flow. I know I'm filled to be empty again. The seed I've received I will sow." When we come to realize the goodness of God, that he is present and gives hope even in our pain, in our hard times, and that he takes what is bitter and empty and makes it sweet and full, that these stories are not just for us. When God moves in our lives and we understand his goodness, that needs to be shared and seen by others. And we see that in the last line of the song. The seed I've received, I will sow. In Ruth, there was a group of witnesses that happened in Naomi's life. And it was these women that came out of Bethlehem, first to see her when she was there, but also to rejoice with her when she had the son placed in her lap. In chapter 1, these women witness her bitterness, and it says, the whole town was stirred because of them. And the women explained, can this be Naomi? To which Naomi then says, do not call me Naomi, call me Mara. But these are the same women at the end that say that Naomi has a son. These same women that came out to see Naomi when she turned from Moab, the same women that Naomi told to call her bitter, and are the same women that Naomi also told she was empty. Yet these are also the same women that now got to see Naomi filled, that now got to see Naomi that she has a son, that her daughter-in-law is one who loves her and is better than 7 sons. These women are present to the care and redemption of God. They have seen it lived out in the life of Naomi. We too need to be making sure that the stories of God taking what is bitter and empty and making them sweet and full are known to people. For it is a testimony to our God. And we see this in the song as well. I will bring praise, I will bring praise. I will declare, I will declare. We serve a God that transforms. We serve a God that redeems. Let our lives be living testimonies to this great truth. When we look at the story of Ruth and we see how it bookends, we do see a woman who is made low, who is made bitter, made empty. Through the grace of God became sweet and filled again. And this is the testimony to the God that we serve. We serve a God that wants to take the broken and make it beautiful. We serve a God that takes the lowly and makes them high. We serve a God that takes the meek and raises them up. Let our lives be the living testimony that there's hope in Christ. Let our lives be the living testimonies that He makes what's bitter sweet. I pray that that's something that we can find this week. So that's what we have for you this week. We invite you to join back next week as we look at chapters 2 and 3 and a little piece of 4 in the book of Ruth, so we can actually look at the character of Ruth. But till then, we invite you to stay safe, enjoy your family's presence, try to enjoy the nice weather out there, and blessings to you on this Super Bowl Sunday.